What did you guys do to me? Jesus. So I got a lot of requests to have a look at this particular video. I had only seen a clip or two of it before via other videos, but I never actually watched it beginning to end or anything like that. And this was shocking. This is shocking. Apparently it was at the Senate Finance and Public Administration. This is the video called What About the Gender Workplace Hours Gap? This is apparently asked by the Liberal Democrats, a senator from the Liberal Democrats as far as I know in Australia. And he was trying to figure out, he was asking questions, follow-up questions about the whole gender pay gap issue. Now, if anybody has seen anything that I've done related to this, they know that it's one of the most annoying myths that is still persisting out there because it's just pure fear-mongering. It's pure nonsense. And it was actually, it was popularized by President Obama and just regurgitated all over the place. I've heard it in a modern office setting where people talk about this stuff as if it's real. And it takes 2 seconds, 2 seconds to think about and debunk what is actually being claimed here. So first, some background. Like I said, it's the Senate Finance and Public Administration in Australia. The senator's asking some questions here. He's talking to the agency head of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. Now, I had missed that actual moniker, the title of the person who was talking. I had missed that, where they work, when I watched it the first time. And then I wanted to see if they got like a banner or anything like that. So I went back to the beginning and I saw because I thought maybe they just worked for the administration or they worked for a bigger government thing, so they didn't really this wasn't really their area. They just did all other stuff, but they had to get thrown in for this. But their agency, their entire agency is about workplace gender equality. They should know more than anybody else about how to figure this stuff out. And yet this is what we got. Oh my gosh. So number one, he goes at it, just directly. He says, okay, well, it's stated that there's a 15.7% gender pay gap. What's the gender hours gap? Now, obviously the question would be, okay, how many work on an hourly? How many work on salary? Because men on average work more hours, and if there are more salaried employees, then based on the salaried employees, you'd have to figure out whether the increased work effort, working more hours on average, translates into more responsibilities or being advanced at a higher rate or whatever. So right now, though, we're just talking about, okay, men work more hours, we know that much. You're saying there's a pay gap, so what's the hours gap? If the hours gap is 15.7%, then there's no news here. This is exactly as it should be, and why are we talking about this, and why are we paying you however much we're paying you to go look into it? So then she just kind of dives in and says, well, and goes this long roundabout explanation just to get to the point of saying, oh, it's 15.7%, and then part-time hours are annualized so we could use them as full-time hours, and completely misses the point. Obviously, the point is, again, that if there's a similar hours gap, then that would nullify any kind of injustice here. But it didn't even occur to her. Like, it was something that seemed so foreign to her. They're just looking at, this is a survey. This is what they did in 2 years. They sent out a survey that said, what kind of contracts do you have with your employees? How much do they get paid? How much do the women get paid? How much do the men get paid? Okay, done. We've figured it out. And then they sat around spending their cushy salary for the next year and 364 days. And then he follows up, okay, do you take into account men work more hours? Is that part of the figures? And she says, no, but we look at part-time, and we included part-time. Again, long answer with no content whatsoever. So then he asks it a different way. He says, if a woman was working fewer hours but earning the same rate per hour, would that show up as a gender pay gap? I wish I would have recorded my initial response to all these things, because I burst out laughing. She opens her mouth, pauses, nods yes, says no, and then looks at her partner. It's hilarious. It's just like her brain broke in that moment that she just, if this is what you do, this is what you're supposed to understand and figure out and try to determine whether there's injustice here and try to figure out what needs to be done about it. You should know this stuff instantly. You're in front of the Senate, however their government works. You're in front of a senator. You're supposed to be able to answer these questions, the one thing that you're supposed to know about, because that's your entire agency and you're the head of the agency. You should know this stuff in and out, thought of every possible variable and ramification and what's an explanation for that or this, or how could this possibly work. You should get these numbers inside and out, and yet her brain just broke. I completely burst out laughing. And then she looks at her partner, and then the other woman jumps in. She's like, no, well, we look at contracts, and that's how we figure out how much they're paid and how much they work. He asks whether you have actual earnings, and she's like, no, we don't have the data to adjust for hours to try to figure that out. And I think somebody reasserts that it's not possible to tell whether attributable to the number of hours worked. And he asks, why don't you collect this information? Obviously, it's pretty significant to know this. And then, oh my gosh, this is where I had to stop it, get up out of my chair, and walk away. It was so ridiculous. She starts talking about how, well, just because someone's sitting at a desk for 12 hours doesn't mean they're working as somebody at their desk for 8 hours. Now, this right here betrays that this person, being the head of the agency, doesn't even have the computational power to understand the issues in front of her. That was one of the most ridiculous responses I have ever heard, or arguments that I have ever heard related to anything. What kind of a response is that? That has nothing to do with anything. We're just talking about a gender pay gap, and this is the method of analysis or reasoning that you use to try to figure out whether there's a horrible injustice going on in your country. Jesus, fire this person. Are you kidding me? I can't even believe, like, the thing that was absolutely shocking to me, that blew me away to no end, and this is one of the things that really concerns me about when it comes to people being hired by the government and how difficult they are to fire, because none of those people, there were like 5 women on the panel, none of them just jumped in and said, obviously, I understand these numbers completely backwards and forwards. Here, let's really break it down and go through it. None of them. All of them, they're like shifting around and having to go through the papers. Later, the head of the agency, she has to go and read a description of her own study because she doesn't know it off the top of her head. Jesus, what? Just some of the dumbest things I've ever heard. Then they just explicitly say, we don't collect that information, Senator. She gets snippy with him. Are you insane? Who do you think you are? Like, this is one of the worst performances and the least informed people I've ever seen in a public forum, and she wants to get snippy with him. So then he reasserts, he's like, okay, so we don't know whether it's occurring or not. We don't know whether it's an injustice or not, whether people are being paid on the basis of gender or not. And then they say something about how we're unable to collect that and analyze that data or whatever. I don't know who designed this stuff. He explicitly asks again, what does the 15.7% reflect? And then she gets snippy again, talks about how, oh, we'll have to look into it. Like I said, I mean, they don't even betray the fact that they understand the issues that are at play in this question. And this was only one possible control that you would have to use to determine whether it's injustice. Only one. This is one out of, 100 of very obvious, reasonable controls that you could use to determine whether men and women are being unjustly paid differently. Wow. Why did you do this to me? It's like killing my faith in humanity. I was considering a move to Australia. A whole agency dedicated to workplace gender equality, and they couldn't even, she just kept saying, no, it's 15.7%, I know what you want from me. There are so many things that could account for the difference between these, and to have just a univariate understanding of what's going on here is mind-blowing. I mean, at the very least, if somebody brought up some other factor, you should at least say immediately, well, no, Senator, we don't have that information, we were completely oblivious and we were drunk all the time. And so when we did this study, it took us 10 minutes and to write the survey, and then we just kind of copied and pasted it over into our report. That's all we did. But now that you're saying something about it, that's something that could obviously account for it. Didn't even go that direction. It was just like, I really don't understand. I have no idea what the moving parts are to this issue, and I'm just gonna reassert the things that make sense to me. Oh my gosh, the descending, the pit of my soul that is just sinking, related to humanity. I don't know what to do. So thank you everybody who suggested this video. Thank you very much. Obviously, when we're talking about the wage gap in general, obviously we have to think about all the controls that could go into place, not the least of which are the kinds of jobs that are chosen, the hours worked, the likelihood of taking vacation, time off for child rearing. When it comes to just the general bell curve IQ distribution, which is not just me. This is like Steven Pinker had a presentation about this, which is really interesting and does a lot to explain why there are so many men in prison relative to women, but also why there are so many male geniuses. So there are so many factors that go into it: willingness to negotiate salary, assertiveness, and there are a bunch of other factors. Assertiveness in the workplace or whatever. Agreeableness is what I think it's called in the actual sociological literature. But there are so many things that actually go into whether this is unjust or not, and to only have one thing and even understanding of only one thing, this one number that you came up with in a completely ridiculous way, and just say that this is evidence of a grave injustice, I mean, it's insanity. Everybody should recognize that. Everybody should point it out. So hopefully it just doesn't keep happening. Oh my gosh. But we still had, in the United States, we had at least 2 presidential candidates, Democratic presidential candidates, Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris, explicitly reference the wage gap and say that it was some kind of a problem. So I don't know where we're going. Anyway, thanks for sitting with me and just seeing me through this. I hope everybody has a good day, and I'll see you on the next one. All right, bye.